When I was younger, I was always ravenous for knowledge. I was the kid who would rather watch the Magic School Bus than Power Rangers, and would often spend my days devouring books well above my reading level. I remember, for some reason or another, I was really taken with reading about pirates. I have no idea why, really. I could try to wax poetic about something something life of freedom, or blah blah adventure, but it was probably little more than me buying into the never-ending ninja versus pirates debate. At some point, I had asked an adult, probably a teacher, although I can barely remember at this point, about why pirates always wore eye patches. I learned that, while some wore the patches due to missing eyes, many instead used them as a tool. You know how your eyes need to gradually adjust to the darkness after you turn off the light? Well, I learned that it's actually a process, in which your retinas switch over from the color-sensitive cones to the light-sensitive rods for light sensing. This way, you can eventually see in the dark by essentially adjusting the sensitivity of your eyes. However, it can take up to 30 minutes for your eyes to fully adjust to the darkness. Pirates figured this out, too, at some point. They often needed to head down to the dark holds of ships that they captured, to search for booty, no doubt, and the patches allowed one of their eyes to be constantly adjusted to the darkness. That way, when they went down to the dark holes, they could simply flip up their eye patch and make use of their already adjusted eye. Now, I can't attest to the historical accuracy of this statement, but no sooner had the story escaped the mouth of my teacher, or whoever it was, than the wheels in my mind began to turn. I had to try it out for myself. The experiment started out simple enough. Before bed each night, I would keep one eye closed during my half hour of reading, before pulling the chain on my lamp and casting my familiar bedroom into the Stygian cover of darkness. And most of the time, it worked. My closed eye was able to see in the dark as clearly as if I had been laying awake for hours. However, I still couldn't quite call it a perfect success. I mean, the streetlights across from my house let in so much light. Plus, was 30 minutes really enough? I had heard of people who got lost in caves before. Imagine how well adjusted their eyes were. So the experiment entered its second phase. I hung thick bedsheets over my windows to block out all light, unplugged my nightlight, and covered my digital clock's crimson leer. Now this was dark. But even with my 30 minutes of pre-adjustment, there were some parts of my room that I could not make out until I allowed my eyes to adjust for much longer. There was only one thing for it. I'd need an eye patch of my own. I fashioned the thing out of a thick piece of felt and some string from the arts and crafts table at school. It was laughably crude, but it did the job. I even added a roughly hewn skull and crossbones on the front, in case any doubts arose as to my inspiration. My parents rolled their eyes when they saw it, but it was harmless enough. "Let the boy play pirates," they said. "It's natural for kids his age." Personally, I think they were just glad that I had developed some sort of interest that didn't keep me shut up in my room all day, and so the eye patch stayed, worn over my left eye during all hours of the day. It was obnoxious at first, but I quickly became accustomed to wearing it. If I had to take it off for baths, I would resolutely keep my left eye shut, careful to let not even a single photon pass my juvenile lids. Naturally, the patch improved the quality of my experiments. When I shut off the light at night, my covered eye creaked open to reveal a startling amount of detail about my darkened room. I could see everything. Well, not quite everything. There was one spot in the far corner of the room that was still too dark to see through. It seemed to taunt me, sitting there squirming at the furthest reaches of my vision. The shadow would slowly fade away as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, but my gaze was still not accustomed enough to pierce it straight away. I then made up my mind. I would not consider my experiment complete until I could fully discern this shadow. In order to do so, I would wear my eye patch for a week straight, and of course, I did. I'm sure at this point, my parents were growing tired of my little pirate game, and were starting to worry about what the neighbors might think. However, the opinions of a bunch of stuffy adults was the furthest thing from my mind. I was focused so singularly on my experiment that I'm sure my grades started to slip, or what passed for grades at that age. However, after a solid week of wearing that eye patch, which had now begun to fray with wear, I was ready. I remember it was a Friday night. I couldn't tell you what month it was. My parents had gone to bed early for some reason or another. In retrospect, I suspect alcohol was involved. The house was completely silent, and as the clock drew closer to 9 p.m., my stomach began to fill with butterflies. I brushed my teeth with haste, practically flew into my pajamas, and was in bed before the clock struck 9. Full of childish excitement, I pulled the chain with one hand and flipped the nasty eye patch off with the other. I was not ready for what I saw. An eye. I blinked for a few seconds. Surely I must be seeing things. But no. There in the corner, in that one dark patch, was a single, unblinking eye. I realized that I was only able to see it with my left eye, the one that had been covered. More eyes. 3 more eyes slowly peeled open, and all began to wink individually by some undiscernible rhythm. The 4 eyes were arranged in 2 stacked pairs, as if someone had overlaid 2 faces onto one another. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me felt like peeing my pants. But right before I bolted out of bed, the eyes all closed. The shadow faded away, like a spot of light that stains your vision eventually dissolves into clarity. I rolled over in bed, tucking the covers closely around my head. I was shaking violently, trying to convince myself that it had been some sort of a dream, a dizzying hallucination brought on by depriving my eye of its sole purpose. With my clock covered, I had no idea how much time passed, but it felt like hours. Eventually, my heart rate slowed, and I was able to relax. My eyes slowly drew heavy and began to close. My perception of the world began to fade away into sleep when the softest noise cut through. "You saw me, now I see you." The soft whisper came less than an inch from my ear. Before I had time to scream or even pee my pants, everything went black. The next thing I remember, I was struggling to regain consciousness. My body felt tired, the kind of ache you feel when you've got a bad flu and can't get out of bed. There were bright lights all around me, but in an unfamiliar layout. I squinted against the searing brightness, and was suddenly aware of how dry my throat felt. I tried to complain about this, but only a weak croak escaped. A flurry of movement surrounded me as the faces of my parents swam into view. "He's awake! Honey, go get the nurse!" Nurse? Was I sick? My mind trundled along at a snail's pace, trying to connect memory circuits to little avail. After what felt like an eternity, and a mouthful of lukewarm water later, I arrived at something approximating consciousness. I was in a hospital bed. An IV was embedded in my arm, and a catheter in my... Don't try to sit up too fast. an unfamiliar voice soothed. "You've been out for quite some time, mister." "How long?" I forced out. "About 6 months." My mind reeled. 6 months at my age felt like 5 years to an adult. In the moment, all I could think about was what I had missed in my favorite TV show. The rush of adrenaline cleared my vision slightly, and I could see the table beside my bed. On it, beside a wilting vase of flowers, was my old Eyepatch. A new fact began to dawn on me. I had become completely accustomed to keeping my left eye closed during the week of my experiment, and realized that, even now, I still only used my right eye. Absent-mindedly, I moved my hand up to my left eye and was thrown for another loop when I found bandages covering that half of my face. I must have screamed, because I remember the nurse running to my side. In her haste, she jostled the small table, causing my naively crafted eye patch to flip around. Its skull and crossbones rotated out of sight, and something else was now visible on the flip side. There was a dark spot of something that had not been there before. Something red. In the days that followed, I was fitted out with a professional eye patch, made of thick, high-quality leather. It fit much better than the child's play toy I had worn before. My parents and the police implored me to tell them what had happened that night, but there was nothing to say. I was attacked by a shadow? Preposterous. After a while, the case was dropped, and a semblance of normalcy returned to our lives. We moved houses immediately, as my parents were convinced that some sort of pedophile was after me. Regardless, I made sure to go to sleep as soon as the light went out from then on. Though, some nights, I could swear I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Was it an eye? No, it was 5.